Uhuru. Welcome to the Omali Taught Me weekly political study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. This is a special edition of this study as Chairman Omali Yeshitela will be reading Chapter 1, The Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment, from the completed political report to the 7th Congress. Let's give it up for Chairman Omali Yeshitela, y'all. We want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela for the writing of this brilliant political report. As I said, it is a political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, which will be taking place October 6th through the 12th in St. Louis, Missouri, at the Uhuru House. And this is the most important historic event since Marcus Garvey's UNIA convention that organized millions of African people. This is, an extension of the Garvey movement. We are the 21st century Garveyites. This political report not only sums up the previous 5 years of the glorious work of the African People's Socialist Party, it also spells out the trajectory of the African Socialist Party going forward for the next 5 years. This Congress, Africans from all over the world are going to participate, including our very own membership of the African People's Socialist Party. This document lays out in the first chapter who the Vanguard is, what it means to be the Vanguard, and what it means to be the advanced detachment of the African Revolution. And it is important not only for the toiling masses of African people all around the world to adopt this political report as our own, it is for the leadership, the membership of the African People's Socialist Party to internalize the significance of this party in the world, our impact, and our responsibility as the Vanguard, as the advanced detachment. So I encourage all of you to follow along in this study, take notes. You will be able to ask questions via the live stream and via the Burning Spear YouTube page. I just again want to salute and want everybody to salute our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, for this profound political report to the 7th Congress. And now I will introduce you to Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru.
Uhuru. I want to welcome everybody to this study this morning. And just to remind you that this political report is a report that's being made for the 7th Congress of our party. It is not simply a document for academia, something that we read for some kind of esoteric appreciation of our own intellect, something to that effect. It is an address to Africans, to the members of our party, to the peoples of the world, of the significance of this moment in history, how we got to be where we are, where it is that we have to go. It is to speak to our conditions as a people, as a class, that is living under oppression and have lived under oppression for 600 years or so, since the advent, since the emergence of colonial capitalism. It is a political report that I also am beginning to introduce on today, while recognizing that on just yesterday, an uprising has occurred in Haiti. This island of some 8 million African people who have performed incredible heroic struggles to liberate African people, and who in many ways have stood alone, separated from brothers and sisters who have also been dispersed to various places around the world against our will, separated from so many other peoples and workers around the world who do not understand the history of this incredible population that has been trapped on that island for several hundred years, who for the longest period of time fed France, that brags about its culture and cannot understand why the world seems to be closing in on it today, who made an incredible revolution that is telling because it shook the entire capitalist world. It was the greatest threat to capitalism in the 18th century. It made a magnificent revolution that freed the Africans who were on that island, and after so doing, offered any slave on the planet Earth their freedom and land if they should get to Haiti. It happened during a time where slavery was clearly, unambiguously, the basis of the world economy, whereas today it is not so clear and it is more ambiguous. And the entire white world set out to crush Haiti, and it has been paying the price for several hundred years for the audacity of this enslaved African population to rise up and overthrow white power, to establish the first post-colonial black republic on earth. And it continues to pay the price for that. And part of the reason it has to pay this price in separation, isolated from the rest of us, is because of a serious ongoing struggle that's being made against African people that challenges our ability to recognize each other even when we see each other, that has imposed upon us false nationalities that would allow us to consider ourselves Negroes and African Americans and Black Brits and Afro Swedes and Jamaicans and a whole host of other things when we are one African people. And this political report will address that question, because if we don't understand that, we can never win. We shall always be trapped, like our brothers and sisters are currently trapped in Haiti, awaiting the awakening of the millions and Africans around the world, the 1 billion Africans who can upset this entire social system once we come to consciousness of who we are as a people, as African people, and what our responsibility is to each other and to the world. So I just want to say that it is extremely important for us to stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters, the laboring masses of African people who suffer so much on that island, and they suffer so much because they have done so much for the liberation of African people and the working peoples of the world. So I don't know the immediate outcome. I understand that this government has sent in troops to crush the uprising of the people against that puppet regime, and there has been a puppet regime there almost since the invasion of U.S. That occurred in, I think, something like 1915, even after the initial invasion, even after the whole white world got together and initiated an economic quarantine of Haiti, daring anybody to trade with Haiti, until Haiti paid the French reparations for France's loss of property after the magnificent, brilliant Haitian Revolution that ended slavery. And the loss of property that France experienced was black people ourselves. And so to make sure that France did not suffer any greater consequences than it had already suffered, the entire white world, and that the world did not suffer, the white world, the entire imperialist capitalist economy did not suffer, the white world got together and forced Haiti to pay reparations to France. And for almost 100 years, the African people, our brothers and sisters in Haiti, were paying reparations to France for having the audacity to free ourselves from French slavery. This is what our brothers and sisters have had to face. And they've had to face it for too long alone, because the rest of us did not understand our relationship to each other. In many instances, that was the case. So we want to salute our brothers and sisters there in Haiti, and we want to call on all Africans every place around the world to recognize the heroic struggles of our people there, and to recognize that we are also Haitians, and that Haiti is also us, and that we have a responsibility to get organized, and we have to take the African Socialist International into Haiti. And the Africans in Haiti must also recognize their relationship to the liberation movement of African people around the world. And of course, the thing that pulls that international liberation movement together is the organization, and the organization is the African Socialist International that our party has been working to create and for such a long period of time. So just be aware of that, and anything that we can do, any place, we should do that to combat what the U.S. and others are doing, and particularly the United States, doing to crush the resistance in Haiti, and anything we can do to lend assistance and support to our brothers and sisters in Haiti, we ought to do that. And so I just wanted to say that moving forward. I think, as I said, the situation in Haiti, more than any event at this moment, punctuates the significance of our upcoming Congress on October 6th through 12th in St. Louis, Missouri. So beginning with this document, which is the political report to that Congress, which is going to be the most important thing that the African world is involved in since the Garvey movement struggled to pull us all together and built the magnificent institutions and organizations for liberation in the 20th century. Uhuru, comrades, delegates, observers, and supporters of the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. During the 5 years since our 6th Congress, there have been many changes in the world and within our party. All of them have served to reinforce the significance of the African People's Socialist Party, which for more than 45 years has provided leadership for the African nation and the oppressed and exploited workers of the world. Comrades, the 7th Party Congress constitutes a firm salute to the indefatigable work of the African People's Socialist Party to forward the struggle for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people under the leadership of the African working class. The continued unrelenting dedication of our party to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s is alive in the theme of this Congress: the African People's Socialist Party, Vanguard, Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution. Although our assertion that we are the vanguard and advanced detachment sets us apart from other organizations, it is not something said in contention with others. This is a declaration to you, the members of our party, calling on you to recognize the magnitude of your party membership and the role you have volunteered to carry out in the struggle for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people worldwide. An example of an advanced detachment is a unit or group of soldiers that goes out first to lead and pave the way for the army in battle. For our party, the advanced detachment or vanguard means that we have freely and enthusiastically stepped forward to lead the struggle for the total liberation and unification of Africa and our entire dispersed African nation, wherever we are located. Unlike any other African organization on the planet, our party is very serious about seizing African state power on our African continent. Our goal is to wrest back our land, our stolen resources, and the value of our stolen labor under the leadership of the African working class in a liberated, socialist Africa. We understand that no oppressed people has ever become free without the intervention of an organization of trained, disciplined cadre who are committed to winning liberation by overcoming every obstacle, including our own limitations. We are a party of professional revolutionaries. Our members have a variety of occupations. We are school teachers, barbers, construction workers, taxi drivers, and the like. We are also students, prisoners, office workers, and welders. We are cooks and even lawyers. But whatever our occupation, our profession is revolution. We are not dilettantes simply committed to faddish political work in our spare time. In fact, our profession as revolutionaries guarantees that there is no time when we are not advancing the struggle for the liberation of our people. This is what it means to be the Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment. The African People's Socialist Party was created to complete the revolution that has been crushed by a vicious US-led counterinsurgency that defeated the Black Revolution of the 60s as it expressed itself globally. There was no other organization in the African world that both survived the counterinsurgency and took up the task to go beyond survival and merely adaptation to our inherited conditions of defeat. Our party was bent on advancing the revolution, the struggle for the total liberation and unification of Africa, and the forcibly dispersed African nation everywhere. We have done much advanced work to resolve the many theoretical issues that otherwise would have been left unresolved by the ruthless colonialist capitalist defeat of our movement, just as the most important questions were surfacing in our struggle. We are practical revolutionaries. We are not an organization of consumers of information, consumers and dispensers of information. We have chosen to lead in every way. We have chosen to be the advanced detachment of the African working class. We have chosen to be the vanguard. Our party understands that in order to change the world, to end our oppression, we must have the organizational vehicle to do so, and willing and trained cadre to carry out the task. This is why we are able to say African People's Socialist Party and Vanguard in the same breath. The African People's Socialist Party is boldly declaring our intent to forge the revolutionary process to defeat imperialism. We are not just talking. We are preparing to govern. We know that parasitic capitalism was created and is maintained through its cruel, rapacious attachment to our Africa and our people. Our intention is to overturn it and replace it through a worldwide socialist revolution based in the forcibly dispersed international African nation wherever we are located. The success of our party is a critical factor in the liberation and unification of Africa and the entire suffering African nation. It is not a little thing. It is for this reason we were able to report to our party's plenary in February 2012 that building the party is not only a crucial task of the African People's Socialist Party and our members, it is also the fundamental task of the African Revolution at this critical juncture. Years ago, in 1986, we summed up the qualities of our party that makes it necessary to characterize the African People's Socialist Party as the vanguard in the pamphlet, Build and Consolidate the African People's Socialist Party. We paraphrase a statement by former Black Panther leader Huey P. Newton when he was a revolutionary during the Black Revolution of the 60s, which stated, quote, "The party must be the ox upon whose back the masses ride," unquote. We pointed out that two 19th century European revolutionaries, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, authored a similar statement with the quote, "The communists therefore are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletariat movement," unquote. We noted that it was left to V.I. Lenin, the 20th century Russian revolutionary, however, to successfully build and lead the revolutionary organization spoken of by Marx, Engels, and later Newton. We quoted Lenin as saying, and I quote here, "Give us an organization of revolutionaries and we will overturn Russia," and explained that Lenin set upon the task to build the revolutionary organization that indeed overturned Russia and became the prototype of revolutionary organizations of the oppressed and exploited peoples throughout the world. Such a party is the vanguard, the advanced detachment of the working class. It is a party of communists, a party of a new type. Such a party is the African People's Socialist Party. Our task then, as now, is to unite our people under the leadership of the black working class in the struggle for political independence, African liberation, and socialism. This political report must win the unity of our party members and the participants of our 7th Congress to the recognition of the gravity of your role as cadre, the advanced detachment of the African Revolution. This political report will demonstrate the material basis to be found in the history and accomplishments of the party and our understanding of the acute crisis of the parasitic capitalist system, for having the confidence and courage to take up your proper role as leaders of the African Revolution. Our political report to the 2017 party plenary was titled, "Putting Revolution Back on the Agenda." In this report, we began to show how the party is the advanced detachment. And we quote here, "First of all, the imperialist crisis, the uneasy equilibrium with which we have been contending is manifesting itself with ever greater clarity in the political arena, especially as seen in the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign and election. Secondly, the neo-colonial African assimilationist tendency of our community, while opposed to the election of Trump, is making every effort to support the colonial capitalist system. The assimilationists are doing everything possible to keep Africans loyal to the system and the electoral process, primarily to the ruling Democratic Party, from whence flows their economic security, semblance of power, and influence. The African People's Socialist Party is the revolutionary vehicle of the advanced detachment through which the conscious and organized African working class continues to wage the struggle for the socialist liberation and unification of our dispersed African nation. Instead of spontaneity, which allows the issue of the moment to determine our trajectory, our work is based on a plan stemming from a scientific theory. We continue to check up on our work, to measure our successes and correct our errors, to make certain that our practice reflects and validates our theory. The Party Congress and our plenaries allow us to bring the membership of the party into this democratic process of charting our course. They grant the party leadership the authority to require centralized discipline from all our members and constituent organizations. The 6th Party Congress participants adopted the political report after serious discussions that began more than 3 months prior to the convening of the Congress. The political report was truly a document of our whole party, and the task, the 5-year plan laid out in the political report constitute the party's direction that was voted for by the whole party. Our plenary process is the method the party has adopted to continue summing up our work of making our plan reality and guaranteeing that we do not veer off on some opportunistic gambit based on the whims of any party organization, committee, member, or leader, unquote. The resolutions and mandates adopted at our Congresses safeguard our party against spontaneity and opportunism, factors that distinguish our party and contribute to its continuity, which is key to our strategic approach. Our Congress and plenaries are critical because since the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, more than 2 generations ago, the African People's Socialist Party is the organization that assumed custody of the revolutionary struggle of the African working class and peasantry, indeed of the entire African nation. We are the party that constitutes a historical continuum from the previous era of the Black Revolution of the 60s to its incipient resurgence today. Our mission has never been determined by the events of the moment. Events come and go. Elections are held. Coups overturn governments. Police violence escalates from time to time. Our struggle faces setbacks. But the social system that has arisen from slavery and colonialism remains the same. This is the essential ingredient that must inform our analysis during each period. Our congresses and plenaries contribute to our ability to hold the line, to protect, defend, and solve the problems of the revolution. This is what revolutionaries do. This is what a revolutionary party does. It is also true that the system of oppression under which the entire world and we live and struggle is a parasitic capitalist system that owes its existence to and is nourished by slavery and colonialism. The legitimacy of any movement of the oppressed must ultimately be judged by its opposition to slavery, colonialism, and the capitalist system birthed by slavery and colonialism. Africans and the peoples of the world suffer from a dictatorship of a white nationalist imperialist bourgeoisie currently headquartered in the U.S. While the selection of Barack Hussein Obama as the first African U.S. president and the August 9th, 2014 police murder of 18-year-old Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, may have affected how we carry out our strategy and tactics, the reality of the parasitic capitalist colonial domination of Africa and the world remain the same. This reality shapes our worldview. It makes us African internationalists. We addressed the critical role of our party in the continuing process of solving the problems of the revolution in the political report to the 2016 plenary. We said then, since our inception in 1972, our party has functioned as the primary custodian of the African liberation struggle. We have summed up all the lessons and contradictions of our revolutionary movement to reunite the African nation and liberate and unite Africa and African people worldwide under the leadership of the African working class. The African liberation movement suffered major setbacks since the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. Not only were giants like Patrice Lumumba of Congo and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana brutally murdered and overthrown by repulsive, shameless European-created neo-colonial stooges, but our movement was never able to resolve many of the key ideological and political questions facing our people. This demoralized our people whose dreams and aspirations were spoiled by the disillusionment that followed our movement's defeat and demise. Inside the U.S., it was left to our party to sum up the significance of the life and death of Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King and the destruction of the Black Panther Party along with the accompanying assassinations and imprisonments. It was the African People's Socialist Party that forced the world to recognize that the African liberation movement is one struggle being waged across the globe on different fronts by a forcibly dispersed African nation held in colonial slavery in Africa and elsewhere over the last several hundred years. It was our philosophy, African internationalism, that brought this understanding to the forefront. Without African internationalism, it would be impossible to understand why Africans, sometimes called by an assortment of different names, suffer impoverishment, brutality, and imposed ignorance all over the world, unquote. As we state in the political report to our party's 2010 Fifth Congress, published as One People, One Party, One Destiny, we quote, would capitalism and the resultant European wealth and African impoverishment have occurred without the European attack on Africa, its division, African slavery and dispersal, colonialism and neo-colonialism? The answer is no. No, no, and 1,000 times no. In the political report to the party's 2016 plenary, we clarified, quoting again, it was African internationalism that helped to locate the millions of Africans that otherwise would be missing from history by false national identities that facilitate our colonization everywhere and deny Africans the confidence and resources that come from recognition that as a nation, Africans are more than 1.5 billion strong. Our party, through practice and theory, continues up to now to help people understand that despite the ongoing efforts by the United States to demonstrate otherwise, the Black Revolution of the 60s did not simply go away because our militants tired of struggle or came to enjoy our oppressed status in the U.S. Our revolution was militarily defeated through assassinations, mass jailing, slander, and unrelenting harassment. In a word, it was a war without terms that silenced our struggle. This is the understanding that allowed the African People's Socialist Party to recognize that the African charlatans, including Barack Hussein Obama, were elevated to high places as neo-colonial substitutes for genuine revolutionary African leaders of the past. Indeed, these charlatans, every one of them, are a result of the defeat of the revolution, not of its success. We have led and participated in campaigns throughout the U.S. and all over the world, informed by this understanding and steeled by a practice that involved virtually every form of struggle. This is why we can confidently say we are best prepared to lead our people to the reunification of the African nation and the liberation and unification of our African motherland. Unlike most who see the growing unrest roiling the world, the unremitting wars, and the threats to U.S. hegemony in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, and increasingly to the African domestic colony of the U.S. with alarm, we of the African People's Socialist Party recognize this as an era of general imperialist crisis. And certainly this is why the political report to the party's 6th Congress was titled An Uneasy Equilibrium, the African Revolution versus Parasitic Capitalism, where we summed up the science of African internationalism enable our party to avoid the ideological pitfalls that validate the assumption of the superiority of white people. Thus, we have never been diverted from our mission of capturing power and uniting Africa and our nation under the leadership of the African working class. Our party brought science to our defeated African liberation movement at a time when it was generally bogged down in racial and cultural nationalism that indulged in candlelit ceremonies, religious obscurantism, and nostalgia for an often imaginary African past. Through African internationalism, we were able to discover the material basis for the exploitation and oppression of Africans and others in this world. With African internationalism, we can understand the material forces at work in the movement of history. We can clearly see the current shift in the balance of power between the oppressor and the oppressed, between Europe and the rest of us, between the so-called white man and the so-called black man, unquote. We recognize the reality that there is a great contest between an imperialist past that has defined the world for the last 500 years and a liberated future of a totally free and reunited African nation and the emancipation of colonized peoples worldwide. All societies contain an advanced sector. These are people who, for whatever reason, stand out because of their willingness to step forward to address the pressing problems and found in society at any given time. It is they who generally attempt to sum up the areas of social concern and to put forward solutions. The individuals who take up this important social task are those who comprise the advanced sector. Political parties are parties that are comprised of these individuals, but political parties are also parties of particular classes. In the development of capitalism, political parties have historically been representatives of the colonial capitalist class. They represent the selfish interests of that class, even though the colonial capitalist class, because it is a minority exploiting class, must usually disguise its class rule as the popular will of the oppressed and exploited masses. Today, the African working class has our own organization that fights for the selfish interests of our class. Up to now, most of our political activism has taken place inside the ranks of the parties of our oppressors, the colonial capitalist rulers of society. They have been able to continue their rule because we have not had our own working class parties to advance our own selfish class interests that are diametrically opposed to the interests of our oppressors. As colonial subjects of imperialist white power, Africans have only had access to the electoral process since the 1960s. Before that time, our political interests were usually determined by the white colonial rulers or by the African petty bourgeoisie and organizations they established. In the U.S., some of these petty bourgeois-led organizations won popular acclaim because of their successful mobilizations of the oppressed African masses to become directly involved in the movement for basic democratic rights under colonialism. Similarly, on the continent of Africa, it was the African petty bourgeoisie that rose to prominence in the quest for political independence while within the capitalist system presided over by imperialist white power. While some of the demands of the pro-independence African petty bourgeoisie appeared to be radical, they were generally incapable of challenging the capitalist system that has its origin in our colonial domination. This meant that the outcome was a capitalist outcome that now had African management. A meaningful and notable exception to this was the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, that was organized by Marcus Garvey to pursue the liberation of Africa and Africans globally and the achievement of our independent capacity for self-government. The UNIA organized branches throughout the world with a membership of 6 to 11 million Africans. It created groundbreaking economic institutions that included a steamship line, factories, recording companies, and a host of other economic projects intended to initiate a threatening, independent, anti-colonial international economy for African people. The Garvey movement was incessantly attacked by international imperialist white power, especially the US government that falsely charged and imprisoned Garvey before deporting him to Jamaica, his place of birth. While the UNIA never touted its working class constitution, it was the working class character of the Garvey movement that won Garvey the enmity of the African petty bourgeoisie in the era in the first quarter of the 20th century. Many of them, especially the distinguished W.E.B. Du Bois, cooperated with the US government and others to destroy the Garvey movement, in part because of its black working class composition. We are the Garveyites of the 21st century. Like Garvey, we do speak to the interests of the African nation as expressed through the interests and worldview of the independently organized African working class. The philosophy of the UNIA was African fundamentalism, not Pan-Africanism. The worldview of our party, 21st century Garveyites, is African internationalism, again, not Pan-Africanism. As a party of the African working class, we are always consciously contending with the parties and interests of the oppressor nation and the exploiting capitalist class. The African People's Socialist Party is not the African working class. We are its advanced detachment, its general staff, its vanguard, which, like the class parties of the oppressor, looks out for the interests of the whole class, whether the whole class is at any given moment capable of recognizing what its class interests are. The African working class is always in a posture of resistance. This is most obvious in the behavior of young working class Africans who consciously defy convention that usually defines how so-called reasonable and civilized behavior should look. They are constantly breaking out of the social boundaries imposed on our community by colonialism, and in many cases they set new social and cultural trends which, after initial strong ruling class and African petty bourgeois denunciation, are co-opted by proper colonial society. The resistance of the African working class can be seen in the spontaneous rebellions and threats of rebellions that require an oppressive presence of the domestic colonial military police waging barely disguised war in every African community within the US and the entire world. When the African People's Socialist Party when the African working class does not have access to its own African People's Socialist Party, their defiance is most often not politically motivated and directed. When it is occasionally politically directed, it comes under the influence of the white rulers, sometimes transmitted by radical sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie. We have seen this recently in the aftermath of the 2014 uprising in St. Louis, Ferguson, following the colonial police murder of Mike Brown. We have also seen the result of this indirect ruling class influence over the masses of African workers in occupied Tanzania, South Africa, with the rise of the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela, and a host of other radical sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie. Similarly, African working class protests are roiling the African continent, including the Democratic Republic of Congo. The weakness of the African Revolution is again exposed by the fact that the majority of the African working class and poor peasantry do not have the advantage of the African People's Socialist Party, its own party fighting for the selfish interests of the colonized African working class. The African People's Socialist Party has been the instrument of the African working class that continues to rally to its own interests, to its own side, so to speak. However, our party is not only the advanced detachment of the African working class, but as we have said before, we are the vanguard of the entire African national revolution. We have accepted the responsibility of liberating Africa and the entire forcibly dispersed African nation that suffers under the cruel weight of colonialism everywhere. The African People's Socialist Party is the leadership of the African working class, the most consistently revolutionary component of the African nation. But because the African working class is the main social force of a colonized African nation, our responsibility is greater than simply leadership of the working class. The leadership of the advanced detachment of the African working class is an absolute necessity for the liberation of the entire colonized African population, including the African petty bourgeoisie, that has an entirely different definition of what liberation means. The African petty bourgeoisie wants equality with the colonizer, preferably with the colonial ruling class. One sector of the African petty bourgeoisie wants to get rid of the colonizer and its domination of the African nation. It is a patriotic sector of the African petty bourgeoisie because of its opposition to white colonial domination. However, this sector is not interested in overturning the system of capitalism that was created through colonial slavery. In the political report to the party's third Congress held in St. Petersburg, Florida, in September 1990, we defined the difference between the petty bourgeoisie national liberation and the national liberation of the African working class. Although this passage speaks specifically to the situation of the U.S. domestic colonialism of our people, the principle is universal. And we quote here, "The national liberation of the aspiring black petty bourgeoisie is a liberation from the limitations of its development into a full-blown bourgeoisie, limitations which are imposed on it by domestic colonialism, the imperialist rule by foreign gangsters. Within this concept of national liberation is the germ of a future continuing exploitation of the African working class by a black bourgeoisie that has been liberated from the national oppression which prevented the emergence of a free, independent black boss. Such a national liberation is not in the interest of the colonized African working class. The national liberation of the working class is a liberation that will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation." Let me say that again. The national liberation of the working class is a liberation which will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation. The national liberation of the domestically colonized African working class is not only interested in removing the oppression of foreign rule, it is also interested in destroying the class rule which exploits the workers and toiling masses of all countries where the capitalist system prevails. The national liberation of the working class is explicitly anti-capitalist and consciously part of the worldwide socialist movement. I wanted to stop when I talked about the national liberation of the African working class is interested in will sweep away all forms of oppression and exploitation. And when we say all forms of oppression and exploitation, we mean all forms of oppression and exploitation. We mean those forms of oppression and exploitation that are promoted by so-called black nationalists who would talk about how African women, African homosexuals have to be oppressed and exploited. We mean everything that stands between African people and our liberation, every form of exploitation, oppression, the African working class is interested in must destroy all forms. You cannot justify to a conscious, revolutionarily organized African working class the
ability to split the African nation between heterosexuals and homosexuals, and they say the homosexuals have no right, the working class has no right if they're homosexuals, or the working class has no rights if they're women, or the nation, sector of the nation has to be oppressed because they're women or homosexual. That the African working class, organized in its own party, is opposed to all forms of exploitation and oppression. In many writings, we have often quoted V.R. Lenin, the Russian revolutionary who designed the Vanguard party that has influenced the definition of revolutionary party since that time. The African People's Socialist Party is a Leninist-type party based on democratic centralism. Lenin stated, quote, "We are a party of a class, and therefore almost the entire class should act under the leadership of our party," unquote. In the pamphlet, Build and Consolidate the African People's Socialist Party, we explain, following that quote from Lenin, quote, "However, within the domestically colonized population of the U.S., the two main contending social forces are the black working class, comprising 88 to 94% of the population, and the primitive black petty bourgeoisie, which generally speaking has an inordinate amount of influence presently due to the military defeat of the black revolution of the 60s. Its influence is also tied to one or another sector of the colonial white ruling class or the capitalist colonialist state itself. In the past, when the politically active activity and ideology of the black petty bourgeoisie was generalized, in the past, when the political activity and ideology of the black petty bourgeoisie was generalized as an anti-colonial struggle for democratic rights, the black petty bourgeoisie constituted a progressive influence within our movement. However, with the victory of the struggle for democratic rights, which came as a concession to the black petty bourgeoisie, and at the expense of the black revolution of the 60s, the black petty bourgeoisie realized its fundamental political aim and lost any historically derived progressive character it once had. Thus, the mantle of leadership, both for the struggle for national liberation and socialism, has fallen upon the shoulders of the most despised and feared black working class. Thus, the mantle of leadership, both for the struggle for national liberation and socialism, has fallen upon the shoulders of the most despised and feared black working class. Therefore, as the advanced detachment of the black working class, the African People's Socialist Party assumes the leadership not only for almost the entire class, but almost the entire people, unquote. This is why we say we are the advanced detachment or vanguard of the African Revolution. The fact is that we are involved in a struggle for national liberation within which there is also a raging class struggle. This is why we say we are the advanced detachment or vanguard of the African Revolution. The fact is that we are involved in a struggle for national liberation within which there is also a raging class struggle that grows sharper with the crisis of imperialism. The revolutionary aspirations of our people for happiness, the return of hundreds of years of stolen resources, and the construction of a socialist system wherein material want can be conquered will be determined by the African working class having its own independent political vehicle, its advanced detachment, leading the struggle. We are that vanguard. It is the profound duty of the leaders and members of our party to eagerly, enthusiastically accept this responsibility at this Congress, to take our party and people to the future that Africans desire and deserve. The U.S. government is currently the wounded, reactionary, chief imperialist regime of the world that led the counter-revolutionary response of international imperialism to crush the liberation struggles of the peoples during the period of the 1960s, when revolution was the main trend of the entire world. At our 1972 inception, the African People's Socialist Party inherited a political terrain characterized by the fact that the masses had been shot and jailed out of political life. Revolution is characterized by the mass, unbridled participation of the oppressed people in political life. And it was the defeat of the black revolution of the 60s that ended this mass participation. Our party has been busy organizing with the intent of reintroducing the people to political life. We have created various organizations to win the active participation of African people to the task of overturning the colonial government's violent program to prevent us from rising up again. An example of such an organization is the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, NPDUM. Programs to prevent or crush anti-colonial resistance are called counterinsurgency programs. Counterinsurgency employs every form of warfare, psychological, economic, political, etc. However, all counterinsurgency relies on military force in the final analysis. Central to most counterinsurgency programs is what the colonial power calls population and resource control. This is why the prisons are filled with Africans who might be otherwise available for revolutionary organization. This is also why there is an unrelenting murderous presence of colonial occupying military police in every African community in the U.S. and most places in the world. Like the U.S. colonial government, however, our party has always understood that it is only a matter of time before the African working class reclaims our station at the forefront of the revolution. This is why we never forsook revolution for some opportunist substitute. When Mike Brown was murdered by a white nationalist citizen in police uniform, it proved to be the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. It ignited a fierce resistance among the young African working class in St. Louis Ferguson that mobilized Africans throughout the U.S. Our history and the Sixth Congress of our party prepared us for this moment of imperialist crisis and rising consciousness among many sectors within the colonized African nation. Since our Sixth Congress 5 years ago, our party has intensified our work on every front. We are winning. Comrades, delegates, brothers, and sisters, we salute the history of unending resistance of our people and the great advancement of the people's struggle under the unrelenting leadership of its advanced detachment, the African People's Socialist Party. Is relate to Africa. So this is from the first chapter of the political report to the 7th Congress of our party again, that will be occurring from October 6th through 12th in St. Louis, Missouri. And this process that has been initiated by this study is one that is mandated by our Constitution, that requires the political report to be in the hands of our party for at least 3 months prior to our Congress. It is to facilitate the conferences, the regional conferences that will be occurring all over the world, throughout the United States. One I know in Europe scheduled for Paris, for the European region. Another I know occurring in occupied Tanzania or South Africa, and another currently scheduled for the Bahamas, for the Caribbean and the Bahamas. And so these regional conferences will also be occurring, and the members of our party, and we've opened it up to the people at large to have an opportunity to read it, to discuss it, to criticize it, and to have an ability to participate in the Congress in a very informed fashion, to pass resolutions, to promote resolutions, moving our party and the revolutionary project forward. So again, this was the first chapter, and we can open it up now for discussion. And I don't think we have access to the phones this time, do we? So we'll be doing this via Facebook and I guess YouTube.
But so people can make your comments and raise whatever questions that you might have. Uhuru. I see Elena Velasquez, Puerto Rico, needs to hear this more. Uhuru. Is there anyone else? Uhuru, with us. Comrade Penny Hess, here in St. Petersburg. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. This is Penny, African People's Solidarity Committee, under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, and I want to salute the Chapter 1 of this incredible political report, and to just say what an honor it is and how historic it is to be able to be here to hear you reading this, and to recognize this whole understanding that the African People's Socialist Party is the vanguard, which you are, which is of course the theme of the party's 7th Congress and the overarching theme of this political report, this book. And I just wanted to discuss that, the whole question of the vanguard, why that is, why only the party is the vanguard, why that nobody else, upholds the whole question of the African Revolution, solved every problem, and upholds the question of revolution in the entire world that must be led by the African working class and the colonized peoples of this planet, and the significance of the fact that the African People's Socialist Party is the only one doing that, upholding that, and doing it in practice, not just in a theoretical level, but in the actual work of the party day by day that has been going on since 1972. So I just wondered if you could comment a little bit more on this question of the vanguard, the advanced detachment, which you did address in this chapter, but just the significance of that for African people around the world and for all colonized peoples and all people who are struggling to end this system of parasitic capitalism and imperialism. Uhuru.
Well, in the 1960s, this issue of vanguard and advanced detachment was seen in a very subjective fashion. And to say that one is the vanguard or a particular party is the vanguard party was seen as was taken negatively as I said, in a subjective fashion. How can you call yourself the vanguard, et cetera? First of all, when we talk about the vanguard, we go to some length to explain what it is that we mean. That in every society, there is an advanced sector of that society. And it is a sector that sets out trying to solve the problems of that society. And they get organized, in many instances, in political parties. Political parties are comprised of that advanced sector. So the concept of vanguard is not really extraordinary or unusual. I think the thing that makes it appear extraordinary and unusual, particularly in this period, is the fact that nobody else has even assumed a need for or responsibility to liberate Africa and African people worldwide. There's what other force has even claimed that this is what it's about? What other force has said about solving the problems of the revolution that was defeated by the United States government and other imperialist powers in the 1960s? We're the only party that's even claimed that this is what we're about, claim that we are committed to making this revolutionary project, but also that does not call on people to simply accept who we are by our claims, but to say, examine our work, examine who we are. We have set upon and solved the fundamental ideological, theoretical problems
that were left unresolved by the defeat of our revolution in the 1960s. We are the only organization that I know that recognized that we are part of an historical continuum. We didn't just get started when Mike Brown was killed in August of 2014. That August killing of Mike Brown in 2014 and the uprising of the masses of our people simply provided our party an opportunity to more aggressively advance the revolutionary project, solving the problems of the revolution that we've been involved in for all the time. What other organization has even declared its intent to complete the black revolution of the 60s? What other organization has even recognized that the black revolution of the 60s was defeated? What other organization has recognized that there was a black revolution in the 1960s? What other organization has even identified the counterinsurgency? We are the ones who did that. We've solved every fundamental problem. But even after saying all of that, the statement about Vanguard and Advanced Detachment, while should be useful for everybody in the world in terms of recognizing who the party is, because it says something about the relationship that everybody in the world should have with the African People's Socialist Party that's truly committed to a revolutionary solution. But primarily, it's a statement that's made to members of the party that you must recognize your responsibility, what it means. And this is not something that we take lightly. It's something that imposes upon you a huge burden and task to advance the revolutionary project. It is a mantle that you should wear, and the membership of the party is something that you should embrace, recognizing the significance of being, of what you are and what you have to do. And we'll be talking more and more throughout this political report about the history of the party. We're not asking anybody to accept us, at face value just because we say such and such a thing is the truth. But we will show the material basis for making every statement that we've ever made about who we are. And we can do this comfortably without any concern about any meaningful kind of refutation. The best people who contend with us can do is avoid the ideological and political questions and resort to slander and other things like that, for which there are no responses that you can make. It's like somebody said, when you stop beating your wife, and just a mere discussion, means that you are off on some kind of slanderous trajectory. But the fact is that we feel comfortable about saying who we are, and we know who we are, and anybody who, by the time this Congress is over, everybody will be clear on that if they want to harbor any doubts now. But the Vanguard, do you remember, no matter how many differences people had, and we had differences with the Black Panther Party in the 1960s at particular times, but the fact is, there's a way you can contest the fact that the Black Panther Party was a revolutionary center in this country, and in many ways much of the world during the 1960s. And that is why you see a lot of people who take up slogans and demands and things like that were forwarded by the Black Panther Party during this revolutionary period. That's why you also see people that ignore some people and leaders of our party, that we see people doing that with the party, taking up stuff we've advanced 20, 30 years ago, and now they have discovered and using the very same demands and analysis and projects that we have advanced along. That's what happens when you're the Advanced Detachment. People will do that.
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru.
So the questions are rolling in via Facebook. We have Ushindi. It says, Uhuru, Chairman, you mentioned that the attack on our liberation movement was a war without terms. Can you deepen that statement, please? I really appreciate this report and excited about the 7th Congress.
Who is that from?
Ushindi.
Ushindi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when we say it's a war without terms, the international community, which means a European-dominated, defined community of sorts, has during different periods, defined what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior warfare. They've created different kinds of what do they call principles that one cannot do under warfare. You shouldn't bomb and kill civilians, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They've created terms, norms for behavior even during war. And what I'm saying is that the war that's been made against African people did not conform to any terms. There are no rules, no behavior of warfare was ever recognized. They killed us and do kill us in horrible kinds of ways without any regards for international norms, anything like that. They don't even, before this stuff that you saw happening with the Bush regime, where they would capture people, and then to get around international norms, they would identify them as not as prisoners of war, but as some other characterization that they came up with. They were doing that with African people. They just call us criminals. There's no such thing. We've got all these people rotting in prison cells and things like that who are prisoners of war, who are political prisoners. There are no terms that are recognized in civilized world that the U.S. government obeyed when it comes to the fight and war against black people. And that's one of the problems that we have, because we have so many Africans who call themselves leaders who themselves conform to the definition of what is appropriate and inappropriate, while the United States government doesn't do that, has no regard for terms when it comes to killing and destroying our people. Uhuru.
Uhuru. So, I am self-critical. I do not know how to pronounce his name, but I know the person is an indigenous man in Canada. I'm sorry? Inamake. And he says, Uhuru, Chairman, excellent summation of the party's history and its theory. I and we have always found this so informative. Understanding the Vanguard is essential, especially in an age where so many movement actors seek to develop single-issue organizations or decentralized leadership, anarchist-type organizations. The party, the Vanguard, is a vital necessity in our struggle against settler colonialism, parasitic capitalism, and worldwide imperialist white power. Uhuru. We have from Comrade Kake out in St. Louis, more detail about how the petty bourgeoisie lost its value to the African working class because of gaining democratic concessions. And can you explain democratic concessions?
Yeah, most of what came to be known as civil rights. I mean, there was convergence of interests during the 1950s, and you got to remember, people think often of the 1950s as something that just happened, but there's there was an array of political and economic factors that gave rise to the movement of the 1950s. But one of the things that people should remember is that by the 1950s, the Garvey movement had been successfully crushed. And the Garvey movement was a time where the Black liberation movement worldwide was on the offensive. It was moving forward worldwide. Crushing the Garvey movement changed all of that. And so now we found ourselves in a defensive posture, asking for rights within the system itself. What Garvey was saying, we get our own rights, our own system, our own government, et cetera. Now we talking about civil rights, and civil rights becomes the height of everything that you should be fighting for. Now we got civil rights, wow, but not your own rights, right? And you don't even define what civil is anymore. So here we are in this situation from a defensive posture, but it's a struggle for democratic rights. It's what's being fought within the system itself. And there was a convergence of interest here between the African workers who didn't want to be subject to extrajudicial, violence, lynchings, and that kind of stuff, without even the pretext of some kind of trial, and just the horrible treatment of black people in general. So you found a convergence of interest between the African working class, who just wanted to move from this situation of what appeared to be a permanent, unending, I should say, life for our children, unending future of just being servants of white people and white power, and mistreated by white people and white power. And then on the other hand, you had the African petty bourgeoisie, sectors of which wanted to integrate into the capitalist system and the capitalist economy, etc. And so you had a convergence of interest between the working class and the African petty bourgeoisie in terms of each of them wanting to change things, but for different reasons. But because we are a nation of people, all of whom live under colonialism, and colonialism affects us. There's a general way that it affects us in terms of it robs us of all rights, etc. On the one hand, but on the other hand, there's a sector of the population that can solve its problems even while living under colonialism. There have been rich people, Africans, living under colonialism. We're talking about Haiti right now. There have been rich Africans in Haiti. There have been rich Africans enslaved even in this country who, during the period of slavery, a handful who benefited. So what freedom for some people meant was something different from what it meant for other people. And then that was true with the African population. So while all of us could agree that we should have the right to vote, we should have, right trial by jury, we should have a right for education, et cetera, it meant different things. And so as long as that struggle was the thing that was the basis of our unity against white power, then the petty bourgeoisie was a progressive force. Even if it was leading, even if it was calling for the demonstration, it was a progressive force. But at the point where it got the basic democratic rights, where it got the right to vote and the so-called civil rights, they can, as Malcolm X said, sit on the toilet next to white people and things like that, it lost its revolutionary character, because those rights then were rights that were gained at the expense. When I say the expense, well, it made it at the expense of the African working class, because it lost its interest in a generalized struggle. The petty bourgeoisie lost its interest in, even during the heat of this struggle, that's where black power came up. Petty bourgeoisie was not interested in black power, not as it was defined, not as long as the African working class was the primary force that was leading that struggle. They became interested in black power even as the struggle was being defeated, because black power then meant something different even to the petty bourgeoisie. So my point is that they lost in a historically derived. Didn't say that they won't ever be act in a progressive way, but historically derived. And by historically derived progressive character, we mean that which was based in the overall struggle of black people for democratic rights as a people. Uhuru.
This is Haas Ubatu out in California. He says, Uhuru Chairman, I appreciate this first reading of the political report for the 7th Party Congress. Could you explain again why we, as the vanguard of the African poor and working class, assert that Africans everywhere make up the nation of Africa?
Say that again.
Could you explain again why we, as the vanguard of the African poor and working class, assert that Africans everywhere make up the nation of Africa?
Oh. Well, we're going to talk more about the national question, the African nation, as we move forward with this political report. And of course, that was a primary component of the political report to the 6th Congress, this discussion of the African nation. But the fact is that it is the responsibility of the African Revolution to resolve this national question by organizing African people, the African nation everywhere in the world. That's what the African Socialist International is about, is pulling African people in the same way the Garvey movement did. And by the way, I'm not treating this question of the national question as some unresolved theoretical issue. I mean, practically, we've seen the African nation in motion and at work, and the African masses around the world unite with the understanding that we are one nation people dispersed around the world. We've seen that through the movement of Garvey with 11 million African people everywhere black people lived. The Garvey movement existed. But what we are in the process of doing now is constructing the organizational capacity for the African nation to express itself, to realize its aims, to define, realize its aims as a nation. And that's the responsibility of the African Revolution, and therefore it's the responsibility of the advanced detachment of the African nation and the African Revolution. Uhuru.
Uhuru. There's a question from Jonathan Mack. What do you think about Julius Malema and the EFF, which is the Economic Freedom Fighters? Are you interested in working with them? This is his question.
Well, like I said, we have never been absolutely unwilling to work with the African petty bourgeoisie, which is a statement about Malema. He's a bold, radical sector of the African petty bourgeoisie who split with the African National Congress organizationally and who has made some very bold statements. But what has confused a lot of people about Malema is he is somebody who, for example, has called for nationalization of the mines and certain sectors of the economy. And that sounds really radical to nationalize but the problem is that the nationalization simply means that the state now assumes ownership of them. And the question is, when you talk about the state, you're talking about the state, the existing state, the state of the bourgeoisie. And so the African working class doesn't benefit from nationalization. They were nationalized at certain times, even under the apartheid regime. The mines were nationalized. So what we're saying is that socialism is that time where the African working class becomes the ruling class, where the ownership of the means of production now in the hands of the working class, as opposed to any other, as opposed to the bourgeoisie. Yeah. So Malema is, very bold and charismatic person, but does not necessarily address the critical question. The African working class has to come to power, and we're not going to be diverted from that by flamboyant militants, petty bourgeois militants. We have to see it as our responsibility, and that's why we're building I guess the greatest statement of what we think about Malema is the fact that the African People's Socialist Party is building right there in South Africa at this very moment, participating probably in this study while we have at this time right now preparing for the Congress, and will be doing their regional conference in South Africa in September, if I'm not mistaken. So that's what my view about that is. And the other thing about the party is that we working right there in the settlements, in the most oppressed sectors of the African population in occupied Tanzania. That's where we are, So the workers must come to power, and the African People's Socialist Party is the vehicle through which that will occur.
Uhuru on Facebook. This is Betty Joe. This has my heart pounding. I want to appreciate Chairman and this amazing political report. We are the Vanguard, African Internationalists, the African People's Socialist Party. There has been much work done and much more to be done. For the 7th APSP Congress on October 6th through the 12th, Uhuru, que viva la revolución. We have
Que viva.
Huh?
Que viva.
Que viva. My question, this is from Frederick Henderson. My question is, isn't communism, socialism, Lenin, Marx actually a plagiarized version of traditional African political government? And if so, why are we still invoking the names of white political philosophers?
Well, let me just say that we unite with the plagiarized versions of African political what did he say it was? Political systems?
Political government.
Political government. So that's what we're uniting with.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, we unite with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Uhuru. There was another question.
Let me just say also that do you know where this person is located? Our objective is to make a revolution.
And I've heard people say, well, we can't make a revolution because we don't call Africa by its appropriate name. But we call it by the name that Nkrumah and Lumumba called it, and that's what informs us, not this other stuff that's being talked about. And we want to make a revolution. And to say that Africa and political systems, nobody fights more than we. If you say it's plagiarized and it's African, I don't understand what the issue is. The greater issue is all those people who say we can't fight, shouldn't fight, or shouldn't use scientific terminology because white people used it. I don't think that the guy Newton who claimed that the apple fell from the tree and hit him on the head and taught him something about gravity, he didn't invent it, you know. And I just think that science, we take science, and even science, of course, can be something that's used against the people. That's why we are African internationalists and not Marxists and not Leninists and et cetera. So if you don't want to plagiarize, if you don't want to use plagiarized terminology, just say African internationalists and African internationalism. Yeah.
All right, this is from Mensa in Las Vegas. Uhuru, Chairman Amali Shatella, I appreciate this political education of the Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment, the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. Can you further expand upon the advanced detachment in African internationalism versus Pan-Africanism and the petty bourgeoisie?
Yeah, I mean, the concept of Pan-African is simply, the Greek pan, all African. So it makes an assumption about the unity of black people everywhere. But the political movement, Pan-Africanism, was something that was organized by W.E.B. Du Bois. And Du Bois, working with other neo-colonial forces like Gian, who was from Senegal, who was a lick-spittle, boot-kissing, to say the least, force for France, during even the first imperialist war. I mean, these are people who united, and they fought and created the Pan-Africanist Congress to defeat the movement by Marcus Garvey. They went so far, Du Bois did, as to try to get the U.S. government to give him ships so that he could use the ships to destroy the Black Star shipping line that had been organized by Marcus Garvey. He actually went to Liberia, where at the behest, support of the United States government, where the Garvey movement had bought land and had taken a lot of equipments to establish a foothold on the continent of Africa, and worked to defeat that. So the Pan-Africanist movement was born as an attack on the Garvey movement, and also the Garvey movement was a movement of the African working class, and Du Bois was a petty bourgeois intellectual who didn't even like being in the company of working people. I mean, this is his history, et cetera. And so they worked against Garvey, and this Pan-Africanist movement was born in that fashion. And even when we look at people who we've come to recognize as Pan-Africanists, like Nkrumah, Lumumba, Walter Rodney, with the exception of Rodney, Nkrumah and Lumumba, and Sobukwe in South Africa, they met disastrous consequences consequences because of their fidelity to this Pan-Africanist thing. When I say thing, I mean because it was based on nonviolence. Nonviolence was what it was based on. It did not recognize class struggle, anything like that, except it did recognize class struggle because it was against the African working class. And anybody who wants to call herself a Pan-Africanist can be a Pan-Africanist. There's no real criteria except you say that black people everywhere are Africans or something to that effect.
or we are African peoples, something like that. So Pan-Africanism is, African internationalism is the philosophy of the African working class. And we have to contend with all of those forces like the Pan-Africanists who have never hesitated to work with our enemies, with imperialism. We have to contend with them on every front. And we have to be clear that we are in an ideological battle with the Pan-Africanists. And it's a petty bourgeoisie. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Question from Olofin in Hawaii. Uhuru Chairman, what will become of the Vanguard after we have won our liberation?
Well, the people, that's our liberation is to create, will result, first of all, the Vanguard after liberation. It's an interesting question. Because after liberation, we mean under the leadership of African working class, we mean that the working class will have become the ruling class. It means that the working class will then have control, ownership, and control of the means of production. That the ones who now produce value socially now own value socially. It means that African people all around the world are part of this process. So the labor that we have utilized to create all the wealth that we see throughout Europe and in America and Brazil and all those places, they become the collective property of African people around the world, to be used strategically for the development of Africa, so that the places where the mosquitoes are still killing us through malaria and disease afflicting us, and there are no roads and streets that can get crops from the countryside to the docks where they need to be are distributed among the mass of people. Now we have the whole African nation, and our resources are accessible to us, and plus we're going to take back in America and all these other places where our loot is currently stashed, stored, and that will contribute to a strategic process for developing Africa. And this becomes, when I say Africa, I mean Africa and places that are now Africa like Haiti and other places in the world where you have these African populations, predominantly African population, people are starving. And then it changes the world too, because we look at Trump talking about a damn wall, but we're talking about a revolutionary project that will, that the wall would disappear. I mean, the fence there would disappear. It's going to disappear not just because it's something that Africans do on the northern side of the border, but because we are part of the revolution of the Americas as well. And we will participate in and facilitate the revolution on the southern part of the border. And we will collectively tear the wall down. We will collectively make a future for all of us. And these concentration camps, so-called reservations, can disappear almost overnight because the indigenous people now have access to their own resources. A whole new world that we have an opportunity to be shaped. There will never be any such thing as unemployment because all of the work that we have to do to rebuild the world from the disastrous consequences of imperialist white power. So this is a part of the process that will lead to, and the African working class has to have power for a period of time only for the purpose of helping to reorganize the society itself, reorganize production. So it's not production based on private ownership, but collective ownership of the people, and also creating institutions, because there's a lot of stuff that we have to unlearn. This is the whole part of the process of the withering away of nations, part of the process of the withering away of classes and what have you, and the advent of real communism in the world. I know that was a convoluted kind of response, but it was a hell of a question.
Uhuru, this is from Alikia. It's a comment saying, Uhuru Chairman, I want to appreciate the overview before the reading of the first chapter and unite that what's happening in IET reflects the ongoing worldwide struggle against imperialism and neocolonialism. This is the same struggle that the party has been engaged in for nearly 50 years through organization, and that the party's Congress is a place for all African people to be this October.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. Penny, how do you pronounce his name again? Inamake asked, Uhuru Chairman, I am also curious how the party has not only learned from Lenin and the Bolshevik Party in defining and giving form to the conception of Vanguard, but also perhaps Mao Zedong and the revolutionary period of the Chinese Communist Party, and also other vital revolutionary national liberation movements.
Yeah, I think Mao made fundamental contributions to the revolutionary project, and because Mao broke all of the traditional Marxist, Leninist rules, not all of them, but many of them, which presupposed that the revolution would have to be made by industrialized workers, and that's the center of revolutionary activity. And Mao went to the countryside and to the masses of peasants and what have you. In other words, Mao took the whole historical materialist assessment analysis based on the reality of China. And in fact, it's the reality of most of the peoples around the world who do not live in these industrialized countries. In fact, Mao characterized the world revolution that had to be made was because most people did not live in these industrialized countries as the countryside against the cities. And the countryside is where most of us reside. And in fact, that's where most of the resources that feed the cities come from the countryside. And so that was a sort of strategic approach to revolution that Mao developed, and he had to develop it fighting really against the Marxists inside the Communist Party of China. And not only the Communist Party in China, but fighting against the Communist Party of the Soviet Union as well. So he made some really important advancements for the revolutionary project, and one has to really give a lot of respect and appreciation to Mao in particular, but also to forces like Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, who made incredible revolutionary projects. The big problem and weakness of all of them is the acceptance of the general kind of assumption that socialism could come, that did not recognize that capitalism, the whole capitalism, rested upon this edifice of colonialism and slavery, and that to really get to socialism as a world economy, or to make capitalism to destroy capitalism, it required removing the pedestal that the whole capitalist enterprise rested on, and that was slavery and colonialism. So a lot of people have ended up disappointed because they overthrew their local ruling class, and then they still couldn't make socialism happen. They couldn't make socialism happen because the white world controlled all the resources of every place else. So even China becomes independent, but becoming independent did not give it access to the kinds of resources that was coming to Europe or America and other places, because America and Europe was able to steal the resources that were coming from other sectors of the colonized world, and to keep it pumped up, and to isolate China, even Russia, the Soviet Russia, so that they did not have these resources. And so revolution didn't happen there. But Mao was an incredibly important force. And I said also Ho Chi Minh and others who participated in the Vietnamese Revolution in particular. We have so much respect for the Vietnamese Revolution, where tiny country defeated France. And when we said France, we mean French and the rest of the imperialist white power. And even when the U.S. came in to try to rescue it, it crushed the United States as well. So, I mean, there's so much to be learned from them, and we have a lot that we can teach them also with African internationalism, because we have an explanation why even after those heroic struggles by the Vietnamese people, by Chinese people, we still don't have socialism or communism, and the people in Vietnam are now having to trade with the very same vicious people who drop Agent Orange, and that's caused deformed babies, and people are still paying the price for that today. So anyway, African internationalism is the way forward, but we do appreciate, and people like Mao and Ho from Vietnam are some of the people who actually made, I think, really important contributions to African internationalism, how we understand the world. Uhuru.
Uhuru Chairman, I really want to appreciate the study, this report, the African People's Socialist Party, and your leadership. Could you deepen the question of the economic institutions of the party, the current ones and the ones being built, being revolutionary in their ability to further the African Revolution? Uhuru.
You know, Che Guevara became, I'm trying to remember, I think he was after the Cuban Revolution, he was given the post having to do with economics. He was, I don't know if he was Minister of Economics or something to that effect. And I only mention that because after every revolution, the hard work begins, and that's the work of governing. And that's the work of actually knowing how to govern. And what we are involved in right now is actually building the capacity to govern. We're doing what Marcus Garvey set out to do. We're creating an institutionalized capacity to feed, clothe, and house ourselves. This is in the hands of the working class. The working class doesn't have much experience doing this, so that means that it comes with complications and difficulties. But all of the institutions that we've created are institutions that that's in the hands of the African working class, which is sort of a precursor to socialist, to socialism, to the African working class becoming a ruling class, owning and controlling the means of production. That's a struggle that we are constantly involved in. So all of these projects that we're involved in are anti-colonial economic projects. And what we recognized a long time ago is that politics is simply concentrated economics. So when we talk about struggling for national liberation, we are also at the same time talking about struggling for the liberation of the productive forces of the colonized African nation. That means the lands, the materials, the people who know how to use the lands, the materials, the equipment, et cetera, to produce. And that's what we are doing. We are conscious of that, of being involved in that. And we have done it in a fashion that will allow anybody who wants to unite with a genuine liberation of African people to contribute to that, to unite with that. So effectively, that's what we've done. And we've created, many of the institutions having to do with food. We've created, commercial kitchens, and we've created fitness centers, and we've created, right now we're involved in St. Louis with the development of cafe, kitchen projects to train people how to set up businesses and to be involved themselves. We're actually involved going into this Congress with the creation of an incipient banking process that the party will be initiating. So all of this revolves around an attempt by the working class to achieve ownership and control of the means of production. And like I said, this is one of the most difficult things that's happened after the revolution, is knowing how to govern, knowing how to produce. And virtually every revolution, after every revolution, the parties, working class organizations have to turn back to the petty bourgeoisie to keep the factories running, or to get the factories running, and to make things like that happen. We're trying to take on some of that even before the revolution happens. And so this becomes a part of the revolutionary project to take back. This is what we call dual power, to begin to create power in the hands of the working class right now, to create power in the hands of the working class that contends with the power of the bourgeoisie, to the extent that we have power, economic, political power over our own lives. To that same extent, the imperialists and the colonizers do not have that. And that's the definition of colonialism, is the economic and political control of one people by another. Uhuru.
Uhuru Chairman, this is from Raya Fogarty. Uhuru Chairman, can you say more about the involvement of the Communist Party USA and how they worked with the state in the counterinsurgency war against the Garvey movement and ongoing?
Well, yeah, they worked. They did more than that. I mean, they worked with the state in
Du Bois and all the liberals got together and fought against the Garvey movement, and they worked with the state, and they were a part of the Garvey Must Go. But the Communist Party of USA helped to build the CIA, the OSS. They also, during this period of so-called United Front Against Fascism, they had members of their own party who were Japanese to get other Japanese to go into the concentration camps that were created by the United States during the Second Imperialist World War. I mean, it's a treacherous history that the Communist Party has. And at a time where there were only 50 members of black people in the Communist Party didn't even discover black people as a nation, or recognize black people as a nation until 1928. And that was when they because up until then, they were just fighting against Garveyism, because Garvey prevented them, the success of the Garvey movement prevented them from successfully organizing African people into the Communist Party, and it gave communism a bad name. A lot of Africans hate communists and communism. In fact, there's a recent, in this discussion, Comrade may not even know the origin of his resentment to the Marx and Engels and Lenin and all these other forces, because the role that the Communist Party has played in trying to crush the revolutionary movements of African people around the world. Even when the African people were fighting in Angola and Mozambique and places like that against Portuguese colonialism, the left and communists in Portugal were saying that who lived under fascism in Portugal were saying that all of the struggle should go toward ending fascism. That if you end fascism, then it's going to end colonialism. Except Amilcar Cabral was clever enough to understand and say that we don't know anything about that, but if we defeat colonialism, we'll defeat fascism. And it's true. I mean, the defeat of colonialism in the Portuguese Africa led to the collapse of the fascist state. And that makes sense, because whether it's fascist or democratic or however you call it, it's colonialism, and all of that colonialism rests upon the pedestal of the oppression of African and other peoples around the world. So you want to end capitalism, end colonialism, and all of it has to go, because then white people have to get jobs like everybody else.
Uhuru.
Anybody else?
Uhuru. This is from Kenyon Crosby. Uhuru Chairman, you have spoken many times about the crisis of imperialism, which implies the death of capitalism. What should average Africans in America and abroad be doing to prepare themselves for this eventual reality?
Join the party. I mean, it's the simplest thing I can say. Join the party, facilitate it. That's, like when we say that capitalism is dying, that means all of us must become grave diggers. So when you join the party, that's like putting a shovel in your hand and start digging the grave of imperialism. Kill it. That's what we have to do. That's what this project is all about. Kill it, destroy it. Africa must be free, and African people. The worst crime against humanity is offenses that imperialism has made. They enslaved a whole continent of people, destroyed continents of people throughout the Americas. Capitalism must die. And so grab a shovel. And that is join the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement. You probably already are, but tell your neighbor to do that as well. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you for this study. And, just the first chapter of this political report was extremely powerful. And, the fact that the party, the Advanced Detachment, has this thing like a Congress, the only African working class Congress in the world where this is happening today. And it's been a reoccurring question on here, but people are interested in, where the party is located, and specifically, the party building in Africa and the significance of the party being in Africa.
Yeah, I think that this Congress is going to be the most important thing that's happened in the last 100 years. In 1920, almost 100 years ago, this incredible convention of the Negro peoples of the world happened in New York at Madison Square Garden. And the turnout was so huge they could not fit all the people in Madison Square Garden. That's why it said that there were from 25 to 50,000 people
They had to set up speakers outside Madison Square Garden to accommodate the huge crowd of Africans who had come from everywhere around the world. It was at that convention of the Negro peoples of the world that African people voted that we have our own flag, because part of what the Garvey movement contributed to was the consolidation of the African nation. Just like a few days ago, white people in this country were involved in celebrating what they call Independence Day, where they brought out the red, white, and blue. And the red, white, and blue is a unifying symbol for white people. It gives them a sense of national identity, et cetera. Flags do that, and different kinds of ceremonies and holidays, et cetera, do that. And that's why the African people, it was so important for the Garvey movement to give African people our own flag of identification, the red, black, and the green. And that has continued to exist up to now. And that's why people drag it out. Even people who are associated with the anti-Garvey project called Pan-Africanism drag out the red, black, and green, because that's a critically important thing for us. And so the African nation has been split. It's a horrible struggle that we're involved in all the time to unite the African nation. It's not just the contest that exists between African people here and some other, and when I say here, I mean specifically in the United States and some other places. The contest on the continent of Africa itself, where the colonizers, white people, sat down on a table in Germany and created the Cameroonians and created the so-called Ivorians and created all of these different entities and et cetera that separates all of us. But you'll find it even in a local community. Some people would say that, well, Africans down south are different. We are a nation, but that's separate from the other nation because we were enslaved down south and went through some kind of experience in the creation of capitalism, et cetera. All of this serves to divide us. Every time you look up, there's somebody working Black Panther movie. They create a mythological place where all Africans are doing wonderfully on the one hand, but separate from Africans on the continent of Africa and then Africans who are in the United States. They create these false divisions. We did the first reparations tribunal that ever happened in the world. The African People's Socialist Party did that. First, we're the ones who took reparations out of the closet and made it a mass issue, not just the issue of some Africans running around with suitcases chasing legislators or going into courtroom, but a mass issue. The African People's Socialist Party did that. And when we had our first tribunal, this so-called leader from National Liberation Organization sent word to us that he was opposed to it because we had Africans who were sitting as jurists, judges in this tribunal who were from Senegal or from some other places in Africa because they sold us too, kind of nonsensical stupidities. I mean, all kinds of work that divide us. Somebody's heterosexual, somebody's homosexual, somebody is man, woman. These are things that devised to keep Africans from consolidating our nation and consolidating the class that's going to be necessary to win. So the work that we do, the work that Garvey did, to have the African People's Socialist Party in South Africa, and these are incredible young people who are dynamic, who are committed, who want revolution, who want Africa to be free. And that's how they consider it too, because they don't even like too much the concept of Azania, because they say we are Africans, right? And to see that happening in Kenya, to have Africans who are attached to this movement in various places in the world. We got Africans who are organizing right now in France, in Sweden, in England, in Jamaica, in the Bahamas, throughout the United States, et cetera. That is a defining issue, because that reconsolidates the nation, the African nation, bringing us all together. That's where our power, our strength, our resources
everything are located in this process of reunification. So that's the thing that's going to bring the whole imperialist enterprise down to the ground. That's the thing that's going to solve this problem that seems to be some kind of conundrum for Marxists, et cetera, about socialism in one country, because socialism won't happen in one country. It's going to happen as a consequence of all the struggles that black people will be making on the planet Earth that's connected to the struggle that's made on the continent of Africa for taking back all of our resources, and this struggle that will be made in consort with oppressed peoples around the world. This is the way forward for our struggle, and the African People's Socialist Party is that advanced detachment that's leading this process. So there you are, Uhuru.
Uhuru, you have Ayana Asante, who says, thank you for your leadership and continuing Marcus Garvey's work. I'm proud to be a member here and aligned with this movement. Thank you so much for helping my hometown, St. Louis, and East St. Louis definitely needs us. You have Johan Bedingfield, who asks, can you explain the significance of the party's creation of APSC and USM, which is the African People's Solidarity Committee and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, as part of the strategy to win national liberation of African people?
Well, there's a lot about that can be said. But one thing I want to say is that we only have 7 minutes. We don't even have that much time, do we? There's a lot to be said about that, because I think it's one of the most important things that's happened, that we've done, is the creation of the African People's Solidarity Committee, which is an organization of white people that works directly under the leadership of the party. But one of the things that we've done is we've demystified the whole concept of white people, who white people are, and because that's been really mysterious, because they've been characterized as mutants, the devil, and a whole bunch of other things that don't help us to develop some kind of scientific approach to winning our victory. And also, it makes it impossible for us to develop any kind of strategical approach to winning who can be won, even from within the population of the white community. You notice that as much as lynching and horror and all the nastiness that's been said and done to African people by white people and white power, they've never hesitated to unite African people as a part of the struggle to keep us oppressed. They've never hesitated. That's your mayor, your Negro chief of police, the warden at the prison that's holding your children. All of these people are people who work for white power. And that's because the white people come to understand some time ago that they have a system based on oppression and exploitation, and to the extent that they can get people working on that system, no matter how rabid their philosophy is, that philosophy is there to justify maintaining the stranglehold on black people. We have a philosophy that tells us something else about the world. And our philosophy tells us that white people act in a very cruel and inhumane way, and have for a very long time, precisely not because they are demons, not because they are devils, not because they are some kind of biological accident, but because they are people, precisely because they are people. And that all people are motivated by the struggle to produce and reproduce real life. And that white people come from very hostile environments historically, and where it was very difficult to produce and reproduce life, where Africans and others did not suffer the same consequence. And because of that, you look at the history of white people on earth, you see a history of violence, you see a history of looting and robbing and raiders and people who are engaged in that because of how hostile nature was. And so a means of production almost was like stealing from each other, robbing each other, battering each other, etc. And they have come to be the colonizers of the world because it's become a means by which white people produce and reproduce life. So it's nothing mysterious about that. That's just concrete, that's material. And so what we are saying is that through this process, what white people have done over the last 600 years or so is alienate themselves from the rest of the human family, the rest of the people on the planet Earth. And what our struggle is about reachieving the capacity to create and recreate real life, which means taking everything back from white people that they've taken from us so that we can have that one, and having independence. This changes the everything, the political and economic scheme of the entire world. And it also provides the white people who an opportunity to escape from this dilemma that they have, which is in opposition to everybody else on the planet, and they can rejoin the human family. We create the African People's Solidarity Committee because we recognize that, and also because it's strategically significant to have, just like white people power has put in our own communities, white power and blackface even gave you a Negro president, yes it did, gave you a Negro president, then we can have black power in white faces throughout the United States and throughout the world. And this becomes part of the way that white people have an opportunity to commit national suicide and rejoin humanity or join humanity in the process of creating a new world. There's not enough time for me to really go into this extensively, but I'm glad you raised the question because I do want to say that one thing that's very significant about this is that we have to say that if you don't recognize that white people are just people, then you're stuck. Because otherwise, you got to have an army of geneticists. If you say they're mutants, that's why white people act a certain way, or that they're the devil. So it presupposes that you have to have some kind of religious incantations or travel with an army of priests or mullahs or whomever else can cast out demons, etc. Or you can accept the reality that white people are just like others. They're people who have been trapped in a very horrible relationship with the rest of the world by this perverse means by which they have come to accumulate wealth at the expense of other people's. Just take our stuff back, and then we reduce white people to the level of human beings. White people without your stuff are just people. It's just having your stuff in our possession that gives them this aura of being something that they're not. Uhuru.
Uhuru. I just want to salute Chairman Amalia Shatella for that study this morning. And thank you to all of you who participated in this study today.
Wait a minute. Frederick Henderson says, I have to disagree. White people have caveman DNA and are biologically different. So that's a statement. What is caveman DNA? Send it to me, and are biologically different. Send it to me, and you know, I mean, because you can come up with biological analysis, and some people do, and that's the basis that some people. That's certainly what white people have come up with in terms of the differences that they have with African people, because we are biologically different, etc. And some people, even feminists, because men are biologically different, and therefore we're trapped in this biological situation. And I'm not saying that all peoples are alike. There's some biological difference you can find between Africans and Asians and other peoples, but that doesn't mean they're not peoples. That just means they're people with biological differences. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Yeah.
The science of African internationalism. This study was brought to you by the African People's Socialist Party's Department of Agitation and Propaganda, committed to winning the war of ideas. You can take this knowledge on the go and get your world news by visiting theburningspear.com. For more information about the African People's Socialist Party, please visit apspuhuru.org. Economic development means building Black power. The African-led Black Power Blueprint Project is transforming our neighborhoods from blighted to beautiful. Renovating dilapidated buildings is part of a comprehensive strategy by the African People's Education and Defense Fund and Black Star Industries to win economic and political self-determination in the Black community. In the city of St. Pete, our BP96 hosted Black Power Sunday will take place today from 3 to 5 p.m. at Aquaba Hall, 1245 Tyrone Lewis Avenue South, rallying around the abuse of the African community by slumlords in St. Pete. On July 28th, Black Power 96.3 FM will be hosting the second annual Black Media Leadership Awards at the Aquaba Hall, where we'll be recognizing and rewarding local Black media, catered by Heavy D's Food Truck. August 11th and 12th, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations is hosting its annual conference themed There Is No Peace Africa and Africans are at war. U.S. to the world, comply or die. This conference will be held at the Uhuru House in St. Louis, Missouri at 4101 West Florissant. Registration information is available at blackisbackcoalition.org. The African People's Socialist Party, as mentioned many times during this webinar, is hosting its 7th Congress October 6th through the 12th, themed Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution. The 7th Congress will be taking place in St. Louis, Missouri. Registration is open at apsbcongress.org. Start planning your vacation now and get ready to attend the Marcus Garvey Legacy Cruise, taking place December 9th through the 16th. The destinations are Mahogany Bay, Belize, and Cozumel, Mexico. This cruise serves as a fundraiser for the African Socialist International, and first deposits can be made at uhurulegacycruise.org. We want to appreciate you for tuning into today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study. This will conclude the show, and we want to invite you back with us next Sunday, where Chairman Omali Yeshitela will be reading Chapter 2 of the Political Report to the 7th Congress. And for all our listeners on Black Power 96, whether in your car, online, or on the BP 96 app, stay tuned for the Florida Blind Boy up next on Black Power 96.3 FM. Uhuru.